Good evening, and welcome to the Historical Theater Network. I'm Jonathan Barry, and tonight we have a very special program for you. A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with one of the literal founding fathers of the English language drama, Roger Kemble, and discuss his thoughts on the theater, and how he thinks his family has influenced the future of drama. Before we dive in, I'd like to thank our sponsors, History of the Theater by Oscar Brockett, the Kemble Genealogy page, Who's Who in the Theater by Frida Gay and John Parker, CandaceHearn.com, The Kemble Family by Ariel Klein, Hamlet from the Actor's Standpoint, and British History Online. Thank you. Mr. Kemble, we're very pleased to have you in the studio today. Pleased to be here. Now, I'd like to begin with an introduction of yourself, for any of the viewers who aren't aware of you or your family. Alright, well, my name, as previously mentioned, is Roger Kemble. I was born on March 1st of the year 1721. I'm happily married to the love of my life, Sarah Ward, and together we've raised 12 children. And what is your occupation? Well, I started as an actor. It wasn't for very long, though. But I'm glad that I did, because that's where I met Sarah. You see, I was a member of her father's company. Well, it's been so long now. It was back in 1766, that I took over as the manager. And I've just been managing theaters ever since. I even had my own traveling company. Now, you mentioned that you and your wife have 12 children. Would you care to talk a little bit about them? Absolutely. My children are my pride and joy. Although I love all 12 of them dearly, only 5 of them have gone into the theater and really made a name for themselves. Our oldest child is the wildly popular Sarah Siddons. You probably know her for her portrayal of Lady Macbeth. That's what she's most known for. From my understanding, she reached her fame at the Drury Theater, correct? That's actually kind of a funny story. Originally, Sarah debuted at the Drury in 1775, but her first performance there was so terrible, it almost ruined her career. She then decided to stay away from the stage for, I guess it was 20 years. And then, when she returned to the Drury, she became an instant hit overnight. Why do you think that she was accepted after so much time away from the stage? Well, I don't know too much about it, but I know that while she was gone, she went through a lot of different trainings, and I suppose that helped. Before we move on, are there any interesting facts about Mrs. Siddons that you think you could tell us? Well, I don't want to invade her privacy, but I don't think she'll mind if I tell you that before she started acting, Sarah was a maid. A maid? Yes, it was actually in the libraries of the home she cleaned that Sarah first learned about Shakespeare, and she even had the opportunity to meet some of the local poets and playwrights. She also worked with your oldest son fairly often, right? Now, I hate to sound so proud, but our second-born, John Philip, is easily the most successful of all the Kembles, even me. He followed in my footsteps in becoming a theater manager. He got his start at the Drury Theater as well. Well, considering how he and Sarah are so close in age, I assume that they worked at the Drury together. Before he started managing in 1783, yes, Sarah and John Philip acted in many shows together at the Drury. By 1788, however, John was the manager of the Drury. And from there, he's gone on to different projects, but his crowning achievement is managing the Covent Theater. Too bad it burnt down only 5 years after he started there. I remember reading about that in a textbook somewhere. It makes me upset that the burning ultimately just caused him to retire. But he had a wonderful career up till 1808. See, did you even know that John was the first individual to put live animals on a stage? I did not. See, this is why you're here, Mr. Kemble. Now, who is your next child? That would be Stephen. He didn't do very much. He stage managed at the Drury, and he was just your average actor. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that he hates being compared to his brother. Yeah. The next in line is my second daughter, Frances, and we called her Fanny. Now, this is not to be confused with my granddaughter, who is also named Fanny. My daughter was a schoolteacher married to a man named Twiss in Bath for most of her life. It's actually kind of humorous that she's most known for a painting of her that Joshua Reynolds did in 1783. That's kind of an interesting turn from the stage, isn't it? And now that you've brought it up, can we talk a little bit about your granddaughter, Fanny? I suppose. Fanny lives in the United States. She moved and married that Butler fellow while she was touring Romeo and Juliet. The man she married owned several islands in the southwest corner of Georgia in the United States. So she moved in with him in 1832 and hasn't gotten on a stage since. Well, if not on a stage, then what does a Kemble do? Fanny has really developed her writing skills, and she released her autobiography, Journal of Frances Anne Butler, in 1835. That was her full name. The book sold very well in England, but not so much in America, because the stereotypes that she used for Americans weren't really that great. For those viewers that are living in the United States, what can you tell us about the land in Georgia? Well, Fanny eventually had to move to Philadelphia, so she sold the land to a family who eventually named it St. Simon's Island. That means nothing to me, but maybe it does to you guys. Let's keep moving. Now, Elizabeth is your third daughter. That's right, she was a relatively well-known actress in London. She also toured America and has been pretty successful. Now, I couldn't find any information on your next child. Tell us, who's Mary? We don't talk about Mary. She and 4 other of my children died as infants. Oh. I'm so sorry. Why don't we just talk about Anne instead? Anne Julia has had a very difficult life. She married a man with the Curtis name, and he ended up having a second family, so he left, leaving Anne with nothing. She moved into a brothel where she was accidentally shot in the face by accident, but luckily she was soon able to meet a very not good man, Mr. Hetton, who brought her to America. Well, I'm glad everything worked out for her. I know I've heard her name before. Is there anything significant that she acted in? Well, she didn't act, but while in the US, she did write a libretto titled Tammany, the Indian Chief. This, by the way, was the first libretto written by a woman. She wrote other things, too. She and Mr. Hatton moved back to England in 1799 to a town called Swansea to run a bathhouse. And here, Anne wrote 14 novels under the pseudonym Anne of Swansea. Wow, it sounds like she was very busy all the time. Just to get this out of the way, I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you that the next 3, Catherine, Lucy, and Henry, they all had very short lives. It was a very difficult period for me and Sarah between 1765 and 1773. I'd rather just skip and talk about our final son, Charles. Go ahead. My final son, Charles Kemble. He helped rebuild the Covent Theatre after it had burned down, and then he took over as the manager when John left. He also performed many Shakespearean plays. In fact, after his retirement in 1836, Prince Albert cordially invited him to act as Hamlet one last time because of its uniqueness, and that performance has modeled the modern Hamlet. And your last child was Jane. Let's just say that Jane joined Catherine, Lucy, and Henry. She didn't even make it to the new year. I'm sorry. Well, it seems like the theater was a place for your children to thrive, and they certainly benefited from your work. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd like to thank you again for coming in today, Mr. Roger Kemble. Thank you for having me. Thank you for tuning in to today's broadcast. We, at the Historical Theater Network, would like to inform you that while all the information was indeed factual, we recently discovered that Roger Kemble passed away in the year 1802, and our guest didn't look like the Wikipedia picture at all. So we don't actually know who was here in the studio, but I can assure you that our security team has been replaced. This is Jonathan Barry signing off. Have a great night.